Well, hello there, and welcome to our second installment of Spooky Tuesdays. Now, friends, it's week 2. We're heading into a new week of Spooky Tuesdays, and we're meeting a new animal today. I've given you a hint. I've added something to my Swamp Witch hat. And you know the time has come. We have to talk about this animal, friends. We're talking today about snakes. Now, maybe you saw the title and you thought, I don't think I'm going to like this. But you hit play, right? Or maybe you're here and you're like, you know what, on second thought, I don't really like snakes. I don't know that I'm going to watch this one. I hear you. But friends, the whole point of Spooky Tuesdays is to meet animals that maybe we think are spooky or slithery. Maybe they're too crawly. Maybe we don't like them at all. But the whole point is to learn about them, right? So it's not going to be that long, just a few minutes. We're going to talk about snakes. We're going to meet a snake. We're going to talk about some really common snakes and what to do if you meet them. So this might actually be super helpful, and I encourage you to stick around. Okay, so let's get started talking about snakes for Spooky Tuesdays. All right, friends, we're going to meet a snake today. So no worries, we're gonna meet a little baby snake, right? We're gonna start out kind of slow for those of you who are new to the snake club, okay? So this is one of our resident captive snakes here at the park. This is a corn snake. Corn snakes are great because they're really docile, gentle snakes, and they're really amazing ambassadors for snakes in general, right? So they're really good at helping us teach others about snakes because they are so gentle. And they are pretty used to people, which is good. So snakes are reptiles, right? Which means that she is cold-blooded. That means she has to hang out in her environment to adjust her body temperature. That means that she has scales, which we can see, and that means that she lays eggs. So she is a reptile. There's something really cool that snakes do. Let's see if she does it. Something really cool that snakes do is they stick their tongues out, right? Now, some people get kind of afraid, there she goes, when you see snakes do that, and they say, oh my gosh, Miss Kristen, is she going to bite you? Why is she sticking her tongue out, right? But that's actually not the reason at all. Does anybody know why she sticks her tongue out? All right, if you guess smelling, you would be right, okay? So, snakes, they have senses just like we do, right? So we use our tongues to taste, and we use our noses to smell. And that's what she's doing. She's actually smelling, but snakes do that all together. So snakes actually have an organ at the top of their mouth called the Jacobson's organ. And so every time she sticks her tongue out, she's gathering those particles in the air. She brings them back into her mouth. They hit the Jacobson's organ in the top of her mouth, and then that way she knows what's going on. She can smell, right? So every time she sticks her tongue out, she's going, are you a mouse? Are you Miss Kristen? Do I know you? Are you food? Are you not food? That's just the way that she's gathering information about her surroundings, right? So it's one of her senses, just like we have senses. So that's what they're doing when they stick their tongues out, okay? So why are snakes important, okay? I'm sure there are some friends out there that are like, they are not, okay? But the whole point of Spooky Tuesdays, friends, is to talk about how all of these animals, no matter how spooky or slithery, right, is to talk about how these animals fit into their habitat, because they all do, right? They all fit into the ecosystem and they all play a very important job, even this little snake. So the role that snakes play is pest control, okay? For instance, this corn snake, she's in the rat snake family. So that means she likes to eat rodents, okay? That is very helpful. Now maybe you're thinking, Miss Kristen, I have a cat. I don't need to worry about snakes. And while cats are excellent hunters, let's talk about how that actually plays out, right? So if a cat is chasing a mouse and that little mouse goes into its mouse hole, that's kind of it for the day, right? But if a mouse goes in its mouse hole and a snake is chasing it, the snake can continue to follow it, right? And then not only can that snake eat that mouse, but then it can take care of that entire little population, okay? So in that regard, snakes are much better predators and much better at pest control when it comes to rodents. So if you were to find a snake in your backyard or your neighborhood or around your property, you know, think of them being pest control. They are taking care of that problem for you, and they're doing it very efficiently. And in general, they're not going to want to mess with you, and they're going to leave you alone if you leave them alone. So snakes play a very important role. All snakes are carnivores, so they're all meat eaters, and they all eat different things. So we're going to talk about a few more snakes here in a little bit, and how to ID them. But every snake is helping take care of either a pest species like rodents, or they're helping keep other populations in control, right? All part of that food web that we talk about. So we're going to give her a little break, and we're going to talk about some other snakes. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a couple of really common snake species. Now, I want to say right off the top that there are 38 species of snakes that live in South Carolina, and only 6 of those are venomous, okay? And I'll touch a little bit more on that later. But that kind of gives us some numbers to work with at the very beginning. So I'm going to show us a few pictures, not all 38, but I'm going to show us a few pictures of snakes that we're going to see really often in our day-to-day lives, right? So the first one that we see a lot, this is a rat snake. He's called an eastern rat snake. You might also see listings for him under yellow rat snake or greenish rat snake. He is non-venomous, right? So he's easily distinguishable by, he's kind of an olive green color, but he has 5 vertical black stripes that run down his whole body. And sometimes you can even see those markings in his skin if you ever find a snake skin from one of these guys. So these guys are rat snakes. If you see them, leave them be, because again, they're taking care of those resident pest populations, those resident rodent populations. So he's very, very common. Another one, little baby green snake. We see these guys a lot. You might see them when you're out mowing your lawn. Non-venomous, hanging out. They're very tiny, very thin, pretty quick. And so you'll see these a lot around your yard. Okay, another really common one. We get questions about this one quite a bit. This is called an eastern garter snake, okay? And we see these a lot in gardens. These guys eat insects, amphibians, all kinds of little animals. So they're kind of taking care of a lot of those little guys out there. But this is an eastern garter snake, non-venomous, super helpful, just doing his thing. Again, if you see them, just say hello and let him go about his business. Now, I'm going to show you one. If you're a friend that comes to the park quite a bit, you've probably seen this one. This is also non-venomous, but this is one that we see a lot, that we get a lot of questions about. I feel like I talk about this particular snake probably once a week here. So this is called a red-bellied water snake. Now, let's talk about water snakes for a second. They are one of Miss Kristen's favorite groups of snakes, and the reason is because I feel that they are the most misidentified, okay? Now, these guys are non-venomous, but they tend to have, you see those keeled scales, which means they have kind of those rough grooved scales. And what these guys do is they actually exhibit some behavior that mimics venomous snakes. So these guys, if you see them in the wild and they feel threatened or you disturb them, they'll flatten their heads out and they'll kind of coil up their body, right? And make themselves look really chubby, basically, like they'll make their body really tight. And so a lot of times they are misidentified as a venomous snake, okay? But in reality, these guys are a water snake, so we see them in our swamp and around cypress knees quite a bit. Non-venomous, love to eat amphibians mostly, but they will eat some fish. Very helpful, very awesome snakes, and exceedingly common, okay? So let's take a little minute, and then we're going to dive into some venomous snakes. Okay, friends, how we feeling? Feeling okay? So we met some of our common non-venomous snakes. Now, while we're talking about that, I want to say right up top, a lot of times we call snakes poisonous, right? But the correct way to describe a snake that has venom is venomous. And that's because the way that poison and venom enters our body is very different, right? So things that are poisonous, they are things that we have to ingest or things that might touch our skin for it to hurt us, right? Like poison ivy. So that is what separates it from venom. Venom is something that has to be injected, like with a needle. So if we're thinking about snake fangs or even spiders, right, they also have venom. That's what venom is. It is a type of poison, but the way that it enters another body is why it's called venom, and that's what distinguishes it from poison. So, fun fact, you can bust that out at parties. So we've talked about some non-venomous snakes, and now we're going to talk about some venomous snakes, okay, friends? Now, I would like to say, I know there are a lot of stories and helpful things and tips and tricks that people use to try to identify snakes, but you're hearing it here first. Miss Kristen is always going to tell you that the best way to figure out if a snake is venomous or not is to learn those patterns, friends. I've already told you that there are only 6 venomous species, so I'm not asking you to learn all 38 species, but I am telling you that it might be helpful to learn those 6 patterns, right? And the reason I say patterns instead of eye shape or head shape is because, like we learned with the water snake, sometimes nature doesn't play by the rules. There might be mimicry involved, like with the water snake, where he is copying what that snake does. The eastern hognose snake does the same thing. He has a very flat head, which kind of can be mistaken him for a venomous snake, right? Also, nature doesn't play by the rules, even with the venomous snakes, right? We know about the coral snake. She has bright colors, but she has round pupils and a round head, just like my corn snake that we met. So if we were using those indicators of head shape and eye shape, we may not be able to correctly identify a snake and whether or not it's venomous, which can often lead to a lot of poor snakes being removed or killed unnecessarily. Okay, so let's learn about some of these venomous snakes right now and about some of their patterns and how to ID them correctly. Okay, you guys are doing great. So this is a cottonmouth, right? What we also call a water moccasin. So I figured we start out with him because we just ended on our aquatic non-venomous snake. So this is an aquatic venomous snake. So the best way to ID this guy is, I specifically printed this picture because he has a white band underneath his chin. You guys can see that. He has this white band. Now, the tricky thing about cottonmouths is that they do have a pattern on their back, but it is really only visible as a juvenile snake. The older they get, the more dark they become until they're almost as black as Miss Kristen's shirt. And then it's really hard to tell their pattern. So the best thing you can do for these guys is to look for that white chin strap, okay? They're also very chubby. They have that thin neck with a really fat, stout body, okay? Now they do have a pattern you can see. They do have those light brown stripes up against those darker markings. But again, the pattern on this one is to look for that little chin, okay? Now, we all know this one, and friends, maybe this is the most commonly misidentified snake, or maybe he is more identified than is necessary. He is the one that's mixed up a lot, okay? So this is a copperhead, okay? There are so many snakes out there that get labeled as copperheads and that they are not. Even my little corn snake that we met, she often gets mistaken for copperheads, and she's not, okay? The best way to ID these guys is to look for the Hershey kisses, okay? I'm going to show you guys what I mean. If you look, his markings, they look like Hershey kisses, and they go all the way down to the belly. My little corn snake, she has markings along her back, but they don't extend all the way to her belly. He makes little Hershey's kisses, okay? So I showed you that other one because this is a lot what we see, that really common one, and they blend in really well with leaves, right? So these guys are going to be in the forest. They're little forest dwellers eating all kinds of different animals, mainly mice, but other little small animals. But we see that light coloring, which sometimes can be hard to see with the dappled light and the leaves out there. Look for the Hershey kiss, okay? Let's see, we're going to do one more because you guys have already been so good about listening to these snakes for several minutes. This last one, Eastern Diamondback, okay? And he tells you right in his name, he's got those diamonds on his back. And a good little trick for remembering our venomous snakes is that there are only 6. 3 start with C and 3 are rattlesnakes, okay? So we're going to wrap up and go from there. Friends, you have been so wonderful tagging along with me today on our second installment of Spooky Tuesdays. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about these snakes, if only how to ID them. Always remember to wear good footwear when you're out on a hike with your family or out in nature. And remember that snakes don't ever want to harm you, right? As reptiles, it takes a great amount of energy for them to do anything. And at the end of the day, they know that we're not a good prey species because we're up on 2 legs, we're nice and tall and loud, and a snake is not really interested in that. So if you don't mess with them, they won't mess with you, okay? So always remember to be a good naturalist, a good steward when you're out in nature, respect all things, and know that all of them have a place. So thank you so much again for joining me, and I will see you next week for Spooky Tuesdays.